Colourful party presents arms. Colourful party reverse. Colourful party slow.
Looking out over the peaceful French countryside, it is difficult to imagine that 94 years ago today, this same ground was rent by lines of trenches, that it teemed with soldiers, and that the town of Villers-Bretonneux was the scene of violent combat between armies, then in their fourth year of war. When we think of the victory that was won here, we must also remember the cost. And we must remember that the fighting here at Villers-Bretonneux was just one episode in a war that took millions of lives. Though none could have known it at the time, when Allied troops wrested this town from the Germans in April 1918, the war was still more than 6 months from its conclusion. Thousands of Australians who were alive that day were killed before the armistice in November finally put an end to the fighting.
This memorial to all Australians who died on the Western Front during the First World War was dedicated in July 1938. There are many sites significant to Australia in France and in Belgium. So why was this place, Villers-Bretonneux, chosen? In March 1918, the German army launched what was to become its last major offensive across the entire Western Front. Amiens was one objective of that offensive. It was a strategically important centre for the Allies. On the 29th of March 1918, elements of the 3rd Australian Division were ordered to prevent a breakthrough near Villers-Bretonneux. With the help of British units, they did just that. But a month later, the Germans launched another attack that broke into Villers-Bretonneux itself. By the light of a bright moon and burning buildings, the Australian 13th and 15th Brigades, again with British help, counter-attacked. The men of the 15th Brigade crossed ground very close to where we are this morning. Frenzied close-quarter fighting stunned the German defenders, and Villers-Bretonneux was retaken by the morning. It was ANZAC Day 1918, and the threat to Amiens was gone. 3 years to the day after the tragedy of the landings at Gallipoli came this great triumph. You see on the walls around you the names of some of the places Australians fought on the Western Front. Passchendaele, Bullecourt, Pozières, Mont-Saint-Quentin, and many others. The Australian National Memorial could have been at any of those places. However, it is here. Across the Western Front, you will see demarcation stones. There's one on the road just outside Villers-Bretonneux. They bear the inscription, "Here the invader was brought to a standstill." It was here that the Australians performed that task. And later, in August 1918, it was from here that the Australians were at the forefront of the great Allied offensive that led to the Germans seeking an armistice 3 months later. When it came to deciding where to place the National Memorial, Lieutenant General Sir John Monash, once a boy from Jerilderie, now Commander of the Australian Corps, said there is no spot on the whole of the tormented soil of France which is more associated with Australian history and the triumph of Australian soldiers than Villers-Bretonneux. The names on the walls here are a stark and sombre reminder of the cost of that triumph to which Monash referred. Those more than 10,000 names of the missing are but a fraction of the 46,000 Australians who died on the Western Front. To remember that every one of them was someone's father, son, brother or husband is to begin to consider the impact that the Western Front had on our young country. This place and this service honours those who died and the many more who returned wounded in body and spirit, and who, like their country, would be forever changed by the war. And at this place and in this service, we also honour the families of those who served, for so many of whom the war did not end in 1918, and for whom the old days would never come again.
It is fitting that this ceremony follows that held this morning at Gallipoli. Many who fought here were veterans of the ANZAC landings and the battles that ensued. Some had been wounded there, and all were affected by the tragedy and sacrifice of that campaign. At Gallipoli, they had won a deserved reputation for courage, bravery, toughness and mateship. They were described in a poem in the December 1915 edition of Punch as the bravest thing God ever made. But none could have imagined the horror of Fromelles, Poitiers, Bullecourt, Passchendaele and the other battles too many to mention. Or the wet, the mud, the extreme cold, the misery. The memorial behind us is a stark reminder of the sacrifice made. Inscribed on it are the names of almost 11,000 Australians. Names of Australians who were killed during the bloody battles across this land, now almost a century ago. For many, these names bring you here today. They were your grandfathers, great-grandfathers, great-uncles. And in the cemetery on the slope behind us, one of those silent cities of the dead, are more than 2,000 graves, 780 of them young Australians who would never come home. They remain forever here in this sacred ground, lovingly held to the bosom of France, with those at home left to suffer the loss, pondering what should have been. As one, Walla Miranda so painfully put, they will never come back, our stalwart men. They will never come back, our splendid men. And beauty weeps in the land of the morn for the flower of love that will never be born. Of the more than 295,000 Australians who served on the Western Front, some 46,000 made the ultimate sacrifice. Our story of war, then and now, is one of ordinary men and women doing extraordinary things. They are stories to be told down the ages. So many Australian families have stories to tell. Stories like those of my 4 great-uncles who served here on the Western Front. 2 were among the men from the Snowy River. Brothers Joseph and Simon Turner enlisted from Amiens in New South Wales. Joe was killed in action while with the 35th Battalion on the 29th of July 1917. He was 25. He's buried at Bethlehem Farm West Cemetery near Messines in Belgium. His brother Simon was killed 4 months earlier on the 2nd of April at Nouriel, about 40 kilometres from here. He's buried at Le Bouquier Communal Cemetery, south of Bulcourt. My family's experience of sacrifice, loss and sadness is one shared by so many other Australian families. Every town and district in Australia was affected by the Great War. This memorial behind us stands as a permanent reminder of the sacrifice made by Australians in that war. At the time of its dedication, King George VI said, "They rest in peace, while over them Australia's tower watch and ward." As Dorothea McKellar wrote, "What does the world, our mother, remember while empire dies? Honour and dreams and courage and everything else goes by. Lost in the dust of her going, lost in time's whelming seas. Mother, forgetful mother, you shall remember these, lest we forget."
To lay wreaths together, Vice Admiral Ray Griggs, Chief of the Royal Australian Navy, on behalf of the Australian Defence Force, and Colonel Guy François Théoa pour la délégation militaire départementale de la Somme.
They went with songs to the battle. They were young, straight of limb, true of eye, steady and aglow. They were staunch to the end against odds uncounted. They fell with their faces to the foe. They will grow not old as we that are left grow old. Age shall not weary them, nor the years condemn. In the going down of the sun and in the morning, we will remember them.
Cattle Party, shoulder, arms.